Good afternoon and welcome to our program. These days, my software is being mysteriously silent. So if you who are attending online, if you can just let me know if you can actually hear me. Sound is good. Like I'm always thinking, if you couldn't hear me, then not much point in asking this question. A few friends here, they're looking at me rather compassionately, so that's good. So, okay. So we're looking at this theme that we have in Buddhism called emptiness. This is rather significant. Why we emphasize the theme of emptiness in Buddhism is not so much because there's something we should think or something we should do, but it's that we actually need to gain an insight into the nature of reality. We actually need to see that this appearance of a snake, in fact, if we look, is actually a rope. And we need to see that phenomena actually do not have inherent existence. They don't actually exist. They exist on the basis of a set of causes and conditions that create an appearance. But let's just bring home the point around what we mean with an appearance. This is very important for us who are practicing the path and who would like to actually have some sense of having meditated and actually sort of gotten somewhere with our meditation. We'd like to actually sort of say, hey, I know what I'm doing with this Buddhist business. And that's where it's important that we understand what the Buddhists, they mean with appearance. See, everything that we're seeing right now is an appearance. I personally have a strong sense of myself. That's an appearance. I have a sense of others. I have a sense of the world around me. I have the sense of all the things I need to attend to do. I have a sense of the people I need to pay taxes to, bills that need to be paid, people that need to be attended to, and various all sorts of jobs that we all have, responsibilities. These all constitute what we call appearances. That means they're real, they figure in our lives, and what the Buddha would like us to do is to understand that these appearances, they are no more real. These appearances are no more real than if we watch a movie. They're no more real than if we are having a dream. They appear on the basis of a set of causes and conditions, and that's where we are deceived. There's not that we're wrong, there's nothing wrong with that, but we're deceived into believing that these mere appearances actually have a reality. And that's the difference between the Buddha and sentient beings. That's why the Buddha is relaxed. That's why the sage, the Dalai Lama, the gurus, they're relaxed because they realize, and it's not on the basis of having had some big mystical experience, but they have realized this fact that we presently can assert on the basis of our analysis. We can assert that these are in fact just a set of causes and conditions that appear in a particular way. For example, if we take a stick of incense or we take a torch and we twirl it around really quickly, it looks like there's a ring of fire. But if we analyze, then we actually know that it's nothing but a torch that's being spun like that. If we're children, then we would believe that there's actually a ring there. But as adults, we're not fooled. We know that this is just a torch that's been swung at high speed. So we're not deceived. That is the kind of analysis we're talking about here. We're not talking about all of a sudden having some breakthrough of some sort. We're talking about simply just analyzing and seeing that all aspects of our experience, all aspects of appearances, the microphone that I'm talking into is made up and composed of all sorts of phenomena, which again can be broken down into particles, atoms, and whatever particles that we subscribe to. And as such, does not have anything except just a set of causes and conditions that come together and make an appearance. Now, these appearances we work with. So in the Buddhist teaching, we refer to that as a relative truth or conventional truth. And that applies to death, taxes, the microphone on the table, myself, the world around me. All of that applies. It's what we call conventional truth. But the problem for us is that we worry about this conventional truth. We don't have the insight that sees that it is in fact just on the basis of causes and conditions that these phenomena appear real. And that's why we're not relaxed. So if you want to know what is it the Buddha ate that made him so relaxed, what is it the gurus are taking that makes them so relaxed, it's the fact that they've actually analyzed things. And that's where we talk about two ways of understanding this. We talk about what we can call categorized absolute, which is what we can arrive at through analysis, and then what is not categorized, which is then realization. So us who are here presently studying this text, we would like to arrive at a place where we have a categorized understanding of this absolute, a categorized or conceptual understanding of what we mean with emptiness. And that what we're then doing right now is going in and looking at that torch that's being spun around and actually seeing, yeah, it appears as a ring of fire, but it is in fact just a torch that's being spun at high speed. And that enables us to arrive at a conclusion about reality. And that is then where we, on the basis of it then meditating, we feel justified in settling the mind and not being entangled in all of this. Having once asserted that these are in fact a mere appearance, then we can actually begin to connect with the sanity that is not entangled with this appearance. And that is what we do with the practice of meditation. And this then leads us to what is not conceptual, which is then what we call genuine realization. So that's where we presently study the work that we're looking at right now with the intention to arrive at a conclusion, what we would refer to as establishing the view with certainty, to actually be sure, yes, what we are looking at in terms of subjective experience of person, what we're looking at in terms of the phenomenal mind, that, I guess I was on a Zoom meeting somewhere, that all of that has been established as being a set of causes and conditions, what we call in a dependent arising, and as such, the consequence of being a dependent arising, just like the ring of fire, because the appearance of a ring of fire is due to a set of causes and conditions. Somebody could sit you down and explain to you, why is it that we perceive a ring of fire when in fact it is a torch that's being spun around? We're going to have Peter come up here one day and actually give us the breakdown on what is actually happening with our brain in terms of our perception and so on, that construes this image in our mind. But the bottom line is that it's a set of causes and conditions, and there is no ring of fire. And likewise, there's a set of causes and conditions that bring us to perceive what is mere appearances as solid appearances. And that's where we begin to lose it. That's where we begin to have attachment and aversion. Just like the little child that sees the ring of fire is thinking, gosh, there's a ring of fire, and might or might not like it, but sees the ring of fire as real. Whereas an adult, knowing it's just the ring of fire, doesn't really care in one way or another, and is able to simply relate with the reality of what is there. So that's what we're doing when we work on the various texts and the various teachings that are about what we call wisdom. And this wisdom is important because that is what enables us not to be deceived, not to be fooled. So if we're going into life, our parents are going to want to give us a few advices about, making sure that you have all the things necessary to enter into life. You got to do your laundry. You got to eat 3 meals a day. You have to brush your teeth and, take care of yourself. And otherwise, you go to pot. So that's where you need to know how to handle life. And what the Buddhas and the teachers they want to do when they give this kind of teachings is really just to enable us to be able to handle our life, to handle our experience. So, predictably, the usual preamble here, nobody gets away. So we're presently looking at the discussion that we come across everywhere in Buddhism, which is identifying what actually we have that we constitute as a self. Well, this self that we mistakenly think in terms of our self, our world, and our experience that brings about everything that we actually experience as a person with a particular identity and a particular individual experience is in fact constituted by what we call the 5 skandhas. And that's where we looked at last time, the initial skandha of form. That's where we had this unconsciousness, this mindlessness, where we all of a sudden begin to think we are actually, what happens is we fail to recognize the nature of mind, and we then constitute this mind as a self, and the perceptions, you could say the radiance of the mind is perceived as other. And that's where we end up having the experience of self and other. That is referred to in the Buddhist teaching as the first skandha of form, and is also what constitutes what we call the first link of the 12 links of dependent arising. So this is significant, and that's where you could say, how did we get here? We can't really blame anybody, and we can't blame ourselves either. It's just a moment of, you could say, cognitive dysfunction in which we misapprehend our reality. But once we have that sense of I and the perceptions that are the object of the I, then we begin to have like and dislike. And that's the second skandha, what we call feeling. And then the third skandha is then, I forget what it's called here, I think perception, perception, which is then where we begin to have narratives. We begin to have narratives about these things that we have attraction or aversion to or neutral feelings about. So on the basis of perception, we then begin to have, you could say, a more elaborate history and an elaborate narrative about our perceptions. And then we begin to have mental constructions which are in fact all the emotions that we have on the basis of that. On the basis of having likes and dislikes and weaving narratives, then we begin to think of things in particular ways, and that's where we then begin to have particular moods and also impulses on the basis of that. All of this, if you like, then is based on an experience of simply just consciousness, which is then this sense where you could say at any given moment, if somebody says, "How are you?" Well, we're actually having moment by moment experiences of consciousness, which is this experience where is in fact, it seems like we're having continuity of experience, but the truth of the matter is we're having continual moments of experience. That's what we call consciousness. For example, if I look at an object, I'm going to have a moment of being aware of that object based on, you could say, the visual faculty. And we looked at in the Abhidharma teachings how we operate with this sense of subject that possesses the faculty, and then the object, which is whatever it might be, the wall or another person, and then the consciousness that's generated on the basis of that. And these moments of consciousness, we actually solidify in terms of thinking there is a reality out there in a particular way, there is a self. But in fact, consciousness is something that are continual moments. And if they weren't continual moments, we'd end up just having one big single consciousness. But we are continually hearing things, seeing things, thinking things. And so we have all these individual moments of what in fact are consciousness. But all of this is held together with a unified sense of my person, my experience. And on the basis of that, then we generally carry around a sense of just a unitary sense of self. But what we're doing here with this analysis, and the point really, like I was explaining before, of the whole project of Vipassana, is really to see how all of this is constituted. So that's where the Khenpo then says consciousness in Buddhism refers to a moment of awareness. As we think about the 4 skandhas that we just discussed, that have already been listed, we might feel that behind all of them was a general sense of awareness or knowing. We might even call it the mind itself, as opposed to the mental events that occur within it. So that's where we have that unitary sense of me. We might feel that this is really what we mean by the I, the self. It seems to be an unchanging, unitary, independent awareness that is just going on as the basis of all our experience. And it is this awareness that is I, the doer. So let's examine this idea carefully. So this is, of course, where the Buddhists are so boring, because we go to the doctor and we'd like the doctor to just give us a pill and just say, pop this pill and everything will be fine. But then you go to a naturopath and they start asking you, what's your life habits? What do you eat? What do you do? How do you handle yourself? And that's so annoying. And then you're actually going to have to change your lifestyle. You're going to have to take some bitter herbs or tinctures. You're going to have to actually begin to address the cause. And that's very annoying for the modern person. They just like a solution. Give me the mantra. Give me the solution to this, you know? But the Buddhists, annoyingly, they actually, in the Buddhist teaching, this is a science. I mean, it's all very good. We have a tremendously sophisticated materialist science. But in Buddhism, the science that really matters is this thing with what's happening with our mind, what's happening with consciousness. So that's where you're going to have to be patient with these terrible Buddhists. They actually insist that we shift the focus to the mind, but not just the mind in terms of what do I feel, what am I experiencing, but actually what is the mind, what constitutes this incredibly solidified sense of self, which we actually can see has no justification. We cannot find a unitary, permanent, independent entity that we call a self. We can see that there are moments of consciousness, and yet we operate with this, you say, delusional condition of believing in a self. So that's the premise of this discussion here. So that's where Khenpo then says, generally speaking, we think of our life and experience going along as some sort of stream in time and space. There is a sense of beginning and end, and one event following on from another. Even though one does not think exactly in terms of a moment of experience having edges around it, nevertheless, there is a sense of its ending somewhere, otherwise it would just merge into something else. So our experience and our self of self is definitely bounded by time and space. So this is where we are, again, just drawing on the whole big picture discussions that we might have around the nature of the universe and so on. We, from the Buddhist point of view, they would say space, time and space is a relative construction. That's something that we construct, that's something that we identify as being solid, when in fact, it isn't something solid. It's not a given. It's something that we construct, and by the very nature of being something that we can analyze, and of course within physics, we have a lot of discussions around phenomena like time, like space, locality, what have you, that identify how this is questionable. This constitutes something that is, if you like, a conundrum. So this is also where, in the Buddhist context, this is justified as something that is subject to our analysis. This is what the Khenpo is not sort of handing it over to the people at Stanford and saying, well, you know, we're waiting for somebody to come up with the final ultimate answer, and then we can just sort of say, okay, now I believe in this. The professors at what is it, Oxford and Stanford, Berkeley, whatever, they've come up with the solution here, and now we'll just sort of fall in line. Here, from the time of the Buddha down to the present day, this is really part of a living tradition where it's not going to help us to just have the answers served up on a silver platter, but we actually have to do this in terms of ourselves, because this insight is not information that's handed down as some dogma or some belief, but it is something that is intended to be like the acid that dissolves our solidity. So that's where we need to actually feel it in terms of our own experience. We need to identify this in terms of our own experience as being something that is constituted, a dependent arising, something that's conditional. But we can only do it by ourselves. So that Khenpo is kindly taking our hand and leading us through it. He says, therefore, it must be possible to divide it up into the smallest conceivable parts and the smallest conceivable moments of time. In the Shravaka approach, one tries to be aware of the smallest conceivable moments of experience in order to be sure that one has missed nothing in one's search for a lasting, unitary, permanent self. So this is now where we're going to analyze this in terms of moments. What one finds is that every moment of experience has two aspects. If it did not have these two aspects, it could hardly be counted as being a moment of experience at all. What are these two aspects? There has to be something to experience and something to experience it. So we have this condition of basically subject and object. In other words, there is always something knowing something or being aware of something. So we have essentially the sense of me and my particular experience. Now, these smallest conceivable moments of consciousness arising dependent on their corresponding momentary object of consciousness are what in Buddhism are known as consciousnesses. This is going back to the Abhidharma. So that is where this consciousness is constituted by these what we call dhatus, the organ that relates to an object that generates a particular consciousness. So the term is vijnana, in Tibetan namshe. And namshe literally means knowing a particular object. It means knowing an entity. So the Khenpo says the vi part of the word can mean partial or divided, or if you like, discrete, something that is out there. Thus, a consciousness is a partial or divided knowing. This contrasts with jnana or yeshe, which means simply knowing or wisdom. So one has to do with a knowing that is not dependent on object. The other is knowing a particular object. So that's where these two aspects of mind really are what constitute very often a field of, you could say, discerning in the Buddhist teaching. There's the mind that is simply just simple, mere knowing, and that is not constituted by the objects. And then there's that, and this is not something that necessarily is even conceptual. This is again where you could say it sometimes sounds mystical because we talk about that which is describable beyond concepts and so on. And within Western phenomenology, we very often have the idea that unless you have language for it, you actually can't experience this. This is a very interesting aspect of social studies and in the humanities, this idea that unless you have words for it, you actually can't experience anything. This is a proposition that has been quite common. But in the Buddhist teaching, we are perfectly comfortable saying you can very well have non-conceptual perception. You can very well have non-conceptual knowing. It's a condition of clarity, which doesn't necessarily concern itself with an object. But what we generally operate with continually throughout our experience is continually concerns about, what's next? What am I doing? What's coming on? What do I feel? What's happening, etc. And these are then what we call vijnana or ordinary consciousnesses. So that's where we distinguish between, you could say, consciousness and wisdom. Anyway, we are simply just talking phenomenology, and we're not really talking about anything that is metaphysical or bound up with religion or mysticism or anything. We're just talking about direct, common experience. So Khenpo says the difference between jnana or jhana and vijnana or vijnana becomes very important in the later stages of the progression of meditation on emptiness. But the upshoot here, he says, the upshoot of this rather long discussion on what is meant by consciousness in Buddhism is that when, in the hopes of resolving one's difficulties, one suggests that the self is that continuing awareness that is behind all one's experience, one must in fact be referring to the stream of vijnanas. So this mind that we think of as me, this is in fact just what we have, a stream of moments. This is where very often teachers will always give this example of the mala, where you have moment, moment, moment. And of course, just like the firebrand, just like a ring of fire. We think, oh, well, there's just one mala, right? There's just one ring of fire, but in fact, it's constituted. So that's where we can see these are what appears as a singular is in fact made up of causes and conditions. So the Khenpo says one may not have analyzed it as deeply as that, but if one still accepts common sense notions of time and space, then the nature of consciousness must be divisible in the way outlined above, existing in terms of something that has a place in space, in time. Furthermore, since each moment of consciousness has a different object, each moment of consciousness is separate and distinct. And that's where we can look at our experience. We can see, I have this moment and I have this moment. And what we do is then we sort of hold on to that. The thing is, we hold on to moment after moment to moment. And that's where we begin to think in terms of unitary experience. We can say, I feel great, I feel good. But in fact, this feeling great and good is really just moment after moment after moment. And that's where in the Abhidhamma, they divide these, actually, they talk about these split seconds. And also in the Abhidhamma, and at this level here, we're talking about the Shravakas. We are talking about also the building blocks of phenomena as, you could say, indivisible particles. What in fact is the equivalent of what we in Greek then call atoms. If anybody is Greek or knows Greek well, you're welcome to challenge me, but I believe that's what atom means. Anyway, furthermore, since each moment of consciousness has a different object, each moment of consciousness is separate and distinct. It might be a consciousness of form, sound, smell, taste, touch, or mental image. These again, like we talked about before with the Stephen Goodman's Dhatu analysis, right? But whichever it is quite distinct from any other moment that has arisen before or is about to arise after it. And that's where we very often think there's a whole reality between past and present. We don't think of it as going from moment to moment. Then again, we might come across these kind of like annoying fridge magnet cliches that just says, well, just let it go, or should I just let it go, or, you know, it's all in the past, you know. This is one of my friend's kids, you know, he would wreak some incredible disaster, sort of, you know, smashing something in the living room, and then his mom would be all upset, and he just says, oh, you know, Mom, it's just in the past. Let it be. Clever kid. So anyway, this is where we actually need to go a bit. We need actually to, well, following up on that, we need to not just have it as a cliche, but we actually need to apply this analysis. And this is what the Khenpo then does. He says the moment before has gone and the moment to come does not yet exist. So consciousness can only ever be momentary, and such a momentary phenomenon would never qualify for the title of self. So that's where we objectify our experiences as particular things, what we're seeing, hearing, etc., and we give them labels. We think about ourselves as momentary. We think of ourselves as a constant that's there. And in fact, what we are solidifying are just moments of experience. And that's where we want to come in, the Buddha wants to come in and say, it's just a movie. It's just moments of experience that what we're doing is imputing. We're imputing solidity onto what is in fact a constant river. So that's where we can call it the Wilson River or the Charles River, but it is in fact something that is continually flowing, and it's never like, you know, what is it again? Heraclitus said you can never step in the same river twice. So he says, thus the mind or awareness that seems to be behind all our experience cannot be the self either. Okay. At the end of our analysis, we arrive at the conclusion that the self is simply a vague and convenient concept that we project now, here and now there onto a stream of experiences. One may wish to maintain that the self is the continuity of the stream of physical and mental events that constitute a personality, and that as such, it does not have to have the characteristics of being lasting, single, and impermanent. This is simply a redefinition of the term self, but it does not explain our emotional behavior at all. And that's all very good. We could just settle and say, well, you know, I'm just a flow of consciousness, and phenomena are just a flow of phenomena. But the thing is, we actually, all of a sudden, we take this consciousness as me. So that's also where we could say we could challenge the whole idea around artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence, totally fine, totally, you could say linear functioning without all the sort of quirky weirdness of our individual personality. But an artificial robot doesn't have the vanity or the jealousy or the pride or the anger or the whatever it might be of an ordinary individual that thinks self, because there isn't any imputed self in there. There's completely, perfectly functioning, you could say, logic applying, mechanistic logic, perfect. So definitely you'd want to vote for the robot, and you don't want to vote for some human who is prone to human tendencies. But the fact is that we, all of us, we are all experiencing not just this rational, cool set of causes and conditions, but we are imputing onto it me. Now the thing is, and this is the Khenpo's point, we can have that smooth saying, well, I'm just a sort of flow of causes and conditions, and so is all phenomena, but we impute a reality that is the foundation for our emotions. And these emotions, they're not just, how do you say, they rule. They have a grip on us, and they constitute everything really, from the very sort of, you could say, fundamental sense of just like and dislike, up to very sophisticated narratives around us. And that's where we cannot discard this emotional sense of I. And this we have all the time. This I is operative all the time. We could very well go without lunch, but there's an I that says, I want this lunch, or I want this, and I want that. And we're not just talking pure, rational, you could say, survival instinct, even though, of course, this is very much tied up to that. And in fact, you could say the whole samsara operates with a basic sense of survival and all of that. And yes, that's justified, but that constantly comes back to this self. And of course, within the Western phenomenology and with Western biology and Western science, we would say, well, that's a given. Everybody wants to survive. But we're looking, in fact, at the population of suffering sentient beings. And so everyone wants to survive, and everybody wants the best for themselves, and everybody is self-centered, and that's completely normal, but that's also the reason why they suffer. So that's where the Buddha is merely there, going into, you could say, within a demography or a population of suffering sentient beings, and saying, okay, there's a common condition of suffering here, but there's something that could be done about it. You can stop drinking the water. You can stop drinking the toxic water, and you'll get over this condition. And the toxic water, in this sense, is the ignorance that perpetuates this sense of I. And so, as far as the Khenpo is concerned, is you can define this constituted personality that does not require to be single, lasting, or independent. That's fine. But that's where we, you could say, irrationally attribute a solidity that is the foundation for our emotional behavior. And that is where the problem comes from. And that's where the Buddha just wants to come in and say, hello, you're imputing something, you're imputing a solidity that actually is only taking place in terms of a deluded mind. And this delusion, we can call it ego. But the problem with saying ego is all of a sudden then you're enemies with yourself, because who is it that's perpetuating ego? And who is ego and who's looking at challenging or controlling ego. So we end up having basically a battle with ourselves. And so that's where the Buddha's very compassionate approach is really just to see there is no ego. That's the main thing. We need, but what we can identify, and that's where you can some say we're in some way innocent. There's a habituation to solidifying something on the basis of a fundamental delusion that we haven't challenged. That's what we're presently challenging. We have challenged this fundamental delusion about something solid. And that's where we could very well get the wrong coffee. This is not the coffee I ordered. And nevertheless, just say, okay, well, I must just try this other coffee. We could actually take reality in stride. And that's, of course, what defines the sage. That's what defines the Buddha. Why is the Buddha so cool? Why is the Dalai Lama so cool? Well, it's actually because of having let go of this essential, you could say, delusion. So that is where this methodology of analysis is relevant for us to have less belief in this apparent solid flow as something that is lasting and single and independent. The Khenpo says, Buddhism is not telling people that they should believe that they have a self or that they do not have a self. So that's not where we're going into a whole discussion about ego or not ego or good or bad or whatever, But it is saying that when one looks at the way one suffers and the way one thinks and responds emotionally to life, it is as if one believed that there was a self associated with the skandhas. So we have this experience of our person, our form, our perceptions, and that doesn't go away. The Buddha doesn't just go into some sort of white light, and that's the end. The Buddha is perceived in terms of having a body, having the same thing. You go up to the Dalai Lama and you give him your watch, and the Dalai Lama will be happy to take it apart and put it together, and is very much present in the world. But so we're not talking about that all of a sudden that we're sort of, you could say, discorporating or disappearing. But the problem is this self that's associated on the basis of the skandhas. And that's where we impute an existence as something permanent, single, and independent. So he says, the Khenpo was saying, it is as if one believed that there were a self associated with the skandhas that was permanent, single, and independent, yet on closer analysis, no such self can be isolated or found. In other words, the skandhas are empty of self. If ever you come across the Heart Sutra, and of course in the morning when we do the morning meditation at 7 o'clock, we chant the Heart Sutra, in which this is actually Avalokiteshvara's point, where he says the skandhas are empty of self. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Form is no other than emptiness. Emptiness is no other than form. And this applies to all the 5 skandhas. So that's why he says the skandhas are empty of self or nature. So the Khenpo says, in terms of relative reality, however, that's coming back to the everyday, the way that we presently think about it. We are presently, roll call. Jakob, yes, I'm here. Yeah. In terms of relative reality, however, because one is so emotionally attached to one's concept of self, all one's mental patterning and habits of thoughts, the samskaras or the impulses, feed and strengthen the idea. Furthermore, the actions that one performs in the belief that it is this self-acting serve to create the world that one finds oneself in. In other words, although one can find no such self in absolute terms, in terms of the relative, one still has to suffer the results of one's past and good and bad actions. So that's where we experience a world, we experience a self, we experience a whole, you could say, situation in which we inhabit a realm and we have a particular conscious experience. Okay. To illustrate this point, Yeah, this is quite helpful. We've got to sort of sum it up again. Like I was giving the idea, the image of the firebrand or the mala. So the Khenpo says, to illustrate this point, take for example a candle flame. One can, in a general way, say something like, that flame has been burning all day. However, in absolute terms, this also, you know, we can, in terms of physics or chemistry, we can assert this. No flame has been burning all day. The flame was never the same flame from one moment to the next. There's just a combustion of particular gases happening on particular conditions. And Khenpo says there was no single independent lasting flame there at all. What we grasp at as a flame is not there. Nevertheless, it's still meaningful to talk about flames. So you can't put your hand into a flame and say, well, you know, it's just an illusion. You're going to burn your hand. So all the conditions for its solidity for sure is there, and all the conditions for having a sense of me, burnt, the flame, and so on. But nevertheless, the self and the flame are constant flux of causes and conditions. Of course, this is not about can you endure a flame or not. This is just really identifying or rather using the image of the flame as what in fact is happening with us. We're continually feeding particular habits. Let's say if I have to stop smoking, then I have the notion, I'm going to smoke now, and I'm going to light up, going to taste really good. But then somebody might say, you shouldn't smoke. And then we have the impulse, I'd like to smoke. And then I don't really want to give up. And in there's a very strong sense of self. There's a very strong sense of self that is attributed to the things that we have likes and dislikes about. That's where there's a very intimate felt experience of the impulses as a self. So that's where we are not particularly concerned really about what are the conditions, but what we're interested in here is that emotionality around the self, because that is where we all of a sudden say good, bad, you know, this person, even though we know, let's say there's a person we don't like, but we know that person is made up of so many different causes and conditions, and the person will be perceived differently depending on who sees the same person. But we're looking at that person in one way, and it's not just that we're sitting down rationally discussing the flaws of that person or the virtues of that person, but we're attributing a solidity that we're attached to. And we'd have to be very alienated to ourselves and rather in denial if we don't actually accept that this is our version of that person. We can't say this is an absolutely bad person. We'd have to be really sort of in denial if we don't realize that this is entirely my projection onto that person. And so we have issues like the smoking, like what we like in terms of just tastes, comfort, inclinations. All of these really constitute particular projections that we are tied up with emotionally. That's where we can see there's something completely irrational taking place. That if you look from the outside, you know, some of us might have a big thing for, I don't know, strawberries, you know, and some really, they break out in hives that they eat strawberries. So you put a strawberry in the middle of this room, everybody has a private experience. It's a different object for everybody. And so it's not like there's something in the strawberry. That strawberry is constituted in the way that it's perceived by the individual subjects, the individual subjectivities. That's why we need to just be on to this thing that we can tentatively talk about it as ego, as long as we're not beginning to come with a heavy value judgment, because that's exactly what we're not doing. We can say we're foolish to believe in an ego, but the issue really at hand is that there's just a misunderstanding taking place. And that's where this analysis that we're undertaking here is not about saying you're good, you're bad. I am bad because I have ego. I'm bad because I have attachment to this or that. But it's really just showing us that they in fact are just a set of causes and conditions that lead us to believe in a particular way. So just like we talk about the flame, or just like we talk about the mala, or the river, or ring of fire, it's really just about seeing that the appearance is not consistent with the actuality behind it. So the Khenpo says, when one meditates on the emptiness of the skandhas, one simply sees them as they are. They are not permanent, single, and independent self, and there is no such self in them. Just as in a dream, once one sees that the person in the dream is not really oneself, any suffering that one may have felt on account of, for example, being burnt or chased by a tiger, simply fades away. In the same way, when one focuses one's attention inwardly on the absence of self in the skandhas, all the suffering caused by taking the skandhas to be the self fades away. Okay, this doesn't happen just one moment to the next. This is what the entire path is about. And it's not easy. And this is where we have no glib culture of fridge magnets in the Buddhist teaching. A lot of Buddhism has been turned into, a lot of Buddhist, you could say some great one-liners have been turned into fridge magnets, but there's never some simplistic idea to like, just get with the program. That's why it's so annoying when people come up and, somebody just lost their, somebody they were fond of, and somebody says, oh yeah, that's just their karma, isn't it? Like, thank you very much, oh yeah, impermanent, like these kind of cliches and simplistic lines that we have a habit of in our culture of sort of just extracting and turning into little sort of dogmatic, easy things that we just sort of throw out there. That, luckily, in Buddhism, there's not this assumption that it's that simple. There's a very serious science behind this that actually acknowledges that this needs to be experienced. And on the basis only of experience and familiarization with experience, then gradually what we call realization takes place. And that's where we don't just attend sort of a weekend enlightenment course where we're going to get it just like that. It's about moment after moment applying insight. So that's where we talk about a path. And that, of course, is seriously annoying if you're sort of used to just having the approach of the pill. There's a very sweet story about Kalu Rinpoche in the 70s. He actually, just as a joke, he let the rumors circulate that he had a Manjushri pill, that if you ate that, then all your delusions would fall away. And for the longest time, actually, this was circulating. Kalu Rinpoche has this pill, It was sort of just a joke, but it somehow got around. And this is sort of the idea, you can drop a tab of acid. The Tibetans have some special herb. You can drink soma. You can do all these external things, and that would do it. Well, it's very sweet, and maybe, a little hit of one thing or another might sort of jolt our ideas of solidity. But to actually go beyond the skandhas and the sense of the self fading away requires actual application. So it doesn't help that you sign up in the Buddhist church, or you sort of have all the right interior decor or whatever. It's really about continual application. That's why we talk about the path. That's where then also the path is not just constituted by sort of a do-it-yourself book. It's very much constituted by a living tradition of there actually being living guidance. So this is a human tradition of actual experience. It's not, you could say, a clinical tradition of objective truths. So the Khenpo says, then the mind, we begin to see through this assumption of the self that's, you could say, imputed on what we experience in terms of our body, in terms of a perceived realm. We begin to let go of that on the basis of the path and on the basis of this insight. The Khenpo says, then the mind can rest peacefully in empty space with perfect confidence and assurance. And what we mean with empty space here is the empty space in the absence of the belief in the self. And that actually allows for appearances to manifest far more vividly. So the sage is not somebody that goes into empty space, but it's that this belief in a self has been freed and has been seen as actually not possessing any reality. And with that, there's no longer the filter, the censorship, the sort of the neurotic engagement with perceptions that constitute a sentient being. And as such, you could say reality manifests with far greater clarity, with far greater color, dimension, texture, etc. So that's where you could say the sage is set free. And that's where we talk about then genuinely connecting with life, genuinely connecting with reality, instead of what we call samsara is kind of like a half-life. It's really just a shadow existence because we're continually operating through this filter of this insecure notion of me. So that's where we talk about resting peacefully in empty space with perfect confidence and assurance. Through meditation, in this manner, all subtle doubts are worn away and the mind can rest naturally in emptiness. And that's where all the ordinary speculations in terms of us trying to find reference point, all the ordinary agendas of the insecure self simply fade away. That's what meditation intends to do, but it is on the basis of us having some initial understanding of what is the nature of these appearances, these perceptions, this sense of I, and then addressing that. Otherwise, meditation just gets hooked up with the agenda of the I. Then we think, oh, if I practice mindfulness, I'll be so much better. I'll feel much greater. We haven't done an iota of addressing the actual cause of suffering, which is the belief in itself. So that's where we have a little bit of an issue then when you could say the methods are sort of taken out of context. Anyway, at the same time, we're very happy if anybody could take Buddhist practices and however they might violate the intention behind it, if it makes them happy, it's not as if the Buddha is going to be a party pooper and saying, hey, you can't take mindfulness and use it for the ego. The Buddha would be perfectly happy if everybody would have a blissful ego for all eternity. Then the Buddha wouldn't have a job. Problem is, if it becomes hooked up with the self, then there's again, now the mindfulness is serving me to feel better. Now it's not working. Now I feel good. Now I feel good again. I'm going to have to work on my mindfulness. It might get me up there, and then it comes down again, and we're continually operating with the same old, same old. So, okay, the fruit of the shower, we'll look at that next time. Any questions?
Can we go back to the start of that consciousness section for a minute?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so it feels like in that he's giving us a hint that the mistake is to assume that we chain together these moments and create the illusion of a continuity, but in fact there is actually a true continuity distinct from the one that we're conjuring up. That's where the discrimination has to be sharp. It feels like he's suggesting that.
So the question is, the discussion of consciousness seemed to imply that there is an actual consciousness to which we.
Sorry, so
yeah.
Maybe we go a little bit forward where he says we make the mistake of assuming, or maybe where those two terms, those two Sanskrit terms.
Oh, the jhana and vijnana. Yeah. Okay.
That's what I'm
Okay. So yes, consciousness as we understand it here in terms of the five skandhas are the individual moments of experience, vijnana.
Which is where we go wrong.
Yeah. And what we have is, you could say, the ground of our consciousness, which is then we are looking at this experience in which we can talk about empty space, no self, the ease of the primordial condition. That is what he's referring to as jhana.
So is there a suggestion there that actually the discrimination experientially, where we can actually listen carefully in our own moment-to-moment experience, are we actually getting moments or glimpses of that?
Yes. So through us beginning to be cotton on to that, in fact, this consciousness that we're attributing as a solid flow, in fact, is moments of individual experience. The moment that we do that, does that allow for us to begin to connect with the the unconditional quality of consciousness, namely wisdom? And I'm going to have to say yes. And that is what we talk about in terms of Buddha nature. But we have to understand that's entirely not on the emotional premise of the self. So there's a big work ahead of us to actually uncover that. For the time being, this is obscured by our addiction or our fixation on these moments of consciousness. But yes, that's right. We are uncovering what, in fact, we have to acknowledge we call the nature of mind. So there is some thing. And that, of course, is where people will come in from the Vedanta camp and saying, hey, wait a minute. That's what we've been talking about all along, pure consciousness. Yes, yes. So that's where in the Buddhist teaching, we're big on at the start, very much identifying how the way that we attach ourselves to objects in terms of self and the perceived, which is our downfall, needs to be gotten to before we get into the unconditional, pure consciousness or wisdom or whatever we might choose. That's where the Buddhists, they would say you need to first take this, what he calls the Shravaka approach, the Hinayana, the notion that we first need to understand dependent arising to identify how we can divide and see clearly where stands the ordinary deluded consciousness and where is that which is beyond delusion. And that this is what we call dividing or discerning between consciousness and wisdom. But we have to have that because unless, then otherwise we could take the methodologies that we find in the notion of settling into some absolute. We could take that as being a place within the self, the ego can hide out, where we're actually not dismantling our assumptions. So this is where this groundwork needs to be in place first. And that's what where we talk about this teaching of the dependent arising as the Buddha's lion's roar, because it sort of freaks out these sort of ordinary assumptions and wakes us up. We need to be able to see that ordinary consciousness is in fact just a set of perpetuating a particular delusion. But yes, that's right. You wouldn't let us get away with that one, okay? Yeah.
You could also, yeah, just because we're talking about it, like we're looking at it and we're analyzing it, therefore breaking it into chunks.
Yeah.
Infers that we have to jump into the relative truth way of looking at it, whereas if we just acknowledge that there's always an ultimate truth.
Yeah.
Like your metaphorical river, you might have never seen water is everywhere, or is somewhere. And it's like you want to talk about person's hydration or whatever. It's all water in there somewhere. But if you want to start talking in particular about it, it's somewhere. So
that's right.
Is that the same thing like relative ultimate? Once we start looking at it, it automatically jumps into
yes. So relative. So the question is, or the comment is that we have like a river where we would say there is a river that's flowing, but it's once we begin to label it, yeah, that's where we trip ourselves up, and that's where we begin to objectify singular phenomena as being, rather we identify what is a set of causes and conditions as a singular phenomenon, and that's where we begin to say this is my territory, or this is this, that, and the other. So in fact, it's a bit like if we diminish. It's a bit as if we diminish reality. And that's also where you're saying water is everywhere. And that's similar. We're diminishing reality. All we're talking about is really just getting beyond this problem we have with our struggling with yeah, but it's more than language because it's what we end up subscribing to emotionally. It's the emotional stuff here. Yeah.
The ego fabricates its proxy of the true state. It fabricates kind of a false notion of the thing.
Yeah, ego is a master of deception. And somebody's asking, what is wisdom? Well, wisdom is that which cuts through this deception. What we're in the Buddhist teaching, we can talk about two kinds of wisdom in the sense of the unconditional quality we were just discussing, which is never deluded, which is the basic of our who we are, if you like, Buddha nature. But this is veiled by consciousness, as we're speaking about it here, in terms of our fixation on our perceptions. And that's where we have another kind of wisdom, which we call prajna, which is, you could say, the insight that cuts through our assumptions. It's prajna that enables us to see that what appears as a snake, in fact, is a rope. And that's where the rope, the snake doesn't go away until we actually look. And what we ordinarily do is think, oh, I wish that snake wasn't here. And now there's 2 snakes, and now there's 3 snakes, and now this. And the Buddha, he would like us, he would like, of course, to say, I'll make the snake go away or whatever, you know. But the Buddha is saying, what you want to do is actually look at that snake and see, there actually is no snake. There's just a rope. And I was imputing snake on what, in fact, where there wasn't a snake at all. And that's prajna. And that's a different kind of, that's the kind of, you could say, intelligence that we're trying to cultivate here, which is discerning. So we're cultivating, just like as a consumer, you know, you have consumer, you know, forums and so on that are educating consumers to be discerning in terms of the products they choose. We need to be discerning in terms of identifying the reality that we're assuming is there, but which is generating our own suffering. So that's what we mean with wisdom then. The question there is, yeah.
Could you repeat what the metaphor with the mala is around?
Yeah, so where we would say, well, there's a mala, that's a unity. Then in fact, the mala is constituted by a lot of beads. So similarly, also like the firebrand. So what we do is we attribute to solidity what in fact is just a set of unitary moments, a set of unitary phenomena. So both time and space, you could say the particles that we perceive as being, you know, I say mouse, you know, but in fact it's just a set of conditions. I impute mouse on that. And similarly also with time, where we also in fact have moments. And we then impute a solidity in terms of a flow or an experience. And in fact, that is where the appearance of a firebrand, once we know that it's just this, it just appears like that. So that's where prajna or wisdom here in this context is to be able to see what appears as a ring of fire is just in fact the twirling of a torch. Yeah. So the snake was a dream, the rope was real. Yeah, the point here really is this quality of prajna or this quality of vipassana that sees that in fact this snake it doesn't have any reality. It was imputed on the basis of a rope. So the main point is not, the main point is that we're no longer having the issue with the snake. Thank you very much. And next time it'll be the conclusion really of this section of the book, in terms of now that we've actually have some idea of how to approach this, then there's the fruit of the Shravaka practice. I would like to say, please don't be dependent on this particular presentation. Get the book. You can have it as a Kindle, you can have it in hard copy. But you know, if you have a book, it actually becomes yours. You develop an ownership with that thing. It sits with you. Here we're a little bit sort of in a rather strange, semi-abstract, vacuous internet format, you know, with a lot of, you know, what have you. What is it again? What is it? Smoke and mirrors. It's all just smoke and mirrors. Get the book, then it'll be real for you. I know. Yes, that's Kindle is still pretty.
3 cups of coffee later, and you got the.
That's right. Yeah, go for it. Okay. Okay, let's see here. Which editor? Good question. Gosh, who is it again? We'll look that up for you. No, that's not. Here we go. Well, that's a rather esoteric publisher. Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso. All right. But that being said, you can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Book Depository. And I've downloaded this through Kindle, so it can be had there. Yeah. Not easy to find the hard copy. Really? Okay. It was. I know it was really quite prevalent in a lot of. Okay, you can get it through Abe. Abe Books, good. But it has been around. It's not on Amazon. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, it might be sold out. Then, yeah, then you go to Abe or whatever. But there are places. Like I remember down in Dakukajuling in Dodon, they used to have lots of copies of this. And in general, it is available here and there. But yeah, you might have to do a little bit of a Google hunt. Yeah. All right. Okay, someone claims something to the opposite. It is on Amazon. I bought it from them. Okay. Okay. So
The difference between Amazon Australia and Amazon.
okay, yes, check out Amazon Australia. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be free. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish, ever more and more. Okay. 2-minute break, don't go away, we'll be back. So welcome back. Now we're at the second component of the program. And this is the practice of meditation. Now that is where what we were just discussing before is introducing us to a perspective where we recognize we're doing something wrong. We're essentially operating with a delusional belief system. And so what we call establishing the view, and all you could say the intellectual, theoretical aspect of Buddhist theory, particularly what concerns what we call wisdom, cultivation of wisdom, or what we call cultivation of prajna. This is all backed up by what we call skillful means. And the skillful means in Buddhism is a huge array of methods. And all these methods, they can range from bathing the Buddha, these things you do in Thailand, to prayer flags, to practice of generosity, practice of discipline, the monastic vows, all the various aspects of practice. And that's where we in the modern world, we very often just look at what do the Buddhists do? And we think that you could understand Buddhism from just observing praxis or observing what Buddhists are doing. And that's profoundly mistaken. Without understanding really what is the objective, then we'd be lost. And that's why Tongsa Khyentse Rinpoche, he says, if compassion, ethics, and wisdom go for a drive, then wisdom is in the driver's seat. And the others two, they can take a back seat, or they can sit in, they can ride shotgun or whatever. But the point is that there has to be a vision. But then that vision again shouldn't be left just as intellectual knowledge. Otherwise, you just have a whole pack of infuriatingly well-informed, opinionated know-it-alls, sort of a race of unbearable Buddhist dogmatists. And you wouldn't want to inflict this on the world, and you wouldn't. That's definitely not why the Buddha taught. The Buddha really taught for us to cultivate a peaceful mind. But the peaceful mind is not intended to be a retreat into a peaceful state to get away from something. It's a peaceful mind that sees reality for what it is. And so the Buddha's project is waking up from delusion and seeing reality. And that's where the Buddha is not just some extraordinary person who had achieved some Olympic degree peace, but is somebody who is free on the basis from complete awakening. But for us to have that awakening, while it's good for us to have some perspective that we gain through the theory, we need to implement it and to apply that. And that's where it's indispensable to meditate. Otherwise, the conditions for integrating this insight will never come about. And that's why we talk about two aspects of meditation. The first we have just been discussing, and that's vipassana. That's insight. And that happens on the basis of us seeing. But for us to see, we need to first have the optics polished. We need to have the peace of mind where we are actually able to ground ourselves and become comfortable with reality, not be completely at the mercy of every thought that arises in our mind. The teachings very often talk about how when we fail to understand really that it's the mind that drives us, then we rather are concerned about what's coming up in my mind. Now I'm thinking this, now I'm feeling this. And it's a bit compared to like in India, they have a terrible habit of pelting dogs with stones. This is, I don't know why they do this, but anyway, it's sort of, you find that not just in India, but across Asia, very often there's this idea of this habit of just throwing stones at dogs. But anyway, it says in the teaching, if you throw a stone at a dog, the dog will be barking at the stone. But if you throw a stone at a lion, the lion actually doesn't really give a stuff about the stone. It just looks around who threw that stone. And that's where the point with meditation and the point with what we're proposing here is not about us being caught up after one event after the other. This is happening to me, this I'm feeling this is good, this is bad, and us constantly being at the mercy of what comes up in our mind. Rather, we look around and seeing what did this. And that's where meditation is indispensable in terms of us actually being like a lion that turns around and see who done it, who threw that stone, who is creating all these thoughts. And we're not really interested in the individual thoughts. In the Buddhist tradition, we don't sit down and analyze what are we thinking, what are we experiencing. We're sitting down and settling into the ground from where these thoughts arise. And that is what we call shamatha. That is what we call settling the mind or calm abiding. And that's not because we in any way are trying to avoid the thoughts, but we're just not really concerned about the thoughts. We're definitely aware of the thoughts, and it's not as if the lion doesn't know that there was a stone thrown at it, but is more concerned with where did that come from. So we're not in any way sweeping thoughts or issues or emotions under the carpet, but we're concerned about the actual ground of the mind, the non-conceptual space in which all these thoughts, all these emotions, they originate from. And that's the purpose then of meditation. And then if we have the additional insight that these thoughts, they are in fact nothing but paper tigers, they don't have a reality, all the drama around the self is based on the imputation of self on what is in fact just a set of causes and conditions, then that's very helpful. And that's where we have vipassana, that is, you can say analytical meditation, analyzing, is there a self, is there an essence in phenomena, etc. That's all very well. But there has to be this mind in which we settle, and there's a sense of ground in which then this insight can really take root within our being. Otherwise, we'll never achieve. Then, it's rather annoying to be around Buddhist culture because there's constantly talk about bliss and happiness and all of that. And, it's kind of irritating. You'd rather just be sort of stick with Netflix, and which is where every single episode is just about the anguish and perversions about neurotic minds and how that sort of plays out. And that's very entertaining. We can identify with that. And then, you probably couldn't get a series of sort of a series on Netflix about Buddhists just sitting, being peaceful and happy. In fact, Matthew Ricard, in his book, The Art of Happiness, he talks about how French intellectuals, the last thing they want is actually something as like happiness. They like to have proper anguished life in which you can create true, art with your sort of passion, and you can't blame them, because this is, of course, this counters the ordinary dogmatic assumption that you are nothing except the brain. And so having passion and all of that is sort of like, no, I'm not. I actually am a living creature. I actually have passion. I have my neurosis and my incredibly colorful personality. But at the same time, once you get over that sort of, you could say, assumption that there is perhaps more to consciousness than just being a motherboard, then in fact, at the end of the day, you don't really enjoy that suffering. And particularly what we're looking at here is perpetuating that continual state of angst, dissatisfaction, is not something that's just limited to this particular life. But even in this particular life, however colorful and interesting our neurosis and our pain is, at the end of the day, it's not something we wish for. So that's where the true potential of the mind also is actually hampered and actually is veiled through this addiction to what in fact is just a regurgitation of our habitual patterns, a regurgitation of familiar narratives, and however colorful they might be, they end up being rather tedious and at the end of the day, painful, stressful, wearing us down. So that's where we owe it to ourselves really to begin to settle into a condition in which we actually have genuine well-being and can be confident in just who we actually are. So the practice of shamatha, calm abiding, is practiced in conjunction with vipassana, but it is very much this aspect of meditation that we focus on when we settle down. And this is where we have this practice of sitting and being properly present, grounding ourselves in actual experience rather than being caught up in all sorts of cerebral and also emotional reactive patterns. So grounding ourselves is facilitated through this act of actually settling our body without moving, not in the sense of subjecting ourselves to some sort of spiritual straitjacket, but more just beginning to inhabit our body, inhabit where we are. And this we do through sitting, however we might choose to do so, on a chair, on the ground, or however, and also really projecting with our body a sense of wholehearted participation in reality. So that's where we sit with a straight spine. We take the shoulders a little bit back. In fact, we sit like the Buddha. We also take the chin in. We put our hands on the knees or in our lap, and we sit without moving. We also relax our jaw. We can breathe through our mouth if we need to, and we lower our gaze. We're not aiming at sensory deprivation, so we don't need to close our eyes, but we do acknowledge that when our eyes are sort of going all over the place, we are distracted, and we can even see it when we see when we see people sitting, gazing around. We can see they're lost in thought, and there's a dignified, present quality when we lower our gaze. This enables us to actually be present. Just like when we are present with a particular thing that we're focused on, we're actually properly there and not carried away by distracting thoughts and so on. So we see when people are working, they're very often not caught up by all the thoughts they have, but they're actually free of their ordinary thoughts because they're focused just on whatever they're doing. Now, what we do in the Buddhist practice of meditation is we shift our focus from just drifting. Again, just like if we were doing some work or if we were focused on a conversation, we shift that attention to the breath. And that's where we need to have that component. Just sitting down and looking terribly serene and all of that won't help if our mind is all over the shop. So we need to bring the mind back to being properly present through having an object of mindfulness, which is then the breath. And then as we're sitting, the way that we focus on the breath in this particular tradition is we focus on the out breath, essentially what connects us with the space where we are. And we focus on the out breath, and then we take a break. As the breath fuses with space, we then relax, let the in breath happens. And again, we're proactive in terms of being attentive to the out breath. That's what we're doing when we're meditating. We're not going into some vague zone, or we're not sitting waiting, when is this going to be over and what's for dinner, and that's where we have to have a very precise focus. So that's what we do. Just like we can focus on something that we are doing something where we're writing, or we're in the traditional meditation manuals, we talk about the threading of a needle. If we're threading a needle, we're quite precise, quite present. And then the third aspect, first the body, then the object of mindfulness, the breath. The third aspect is then the thoughts that arise. And that's where we don't censor out the thoughts, but we also don't tag along with them. We don't ruminate. Rumination, that's when we're sitting and the narratives, they gain our complete submissive attention. We're, like Mingyur Rinpoche says, we're like, yes, boss, whatever thoughts arise, we're onto it. And we're just obediently, submissively tagging along to whatever dictate they might impose on us. And this is where we're allowing the thoughts to be there, but we're actually not falling for the ordinary seduction and the ordinary traction. We're not biting into the bait. We're aware of what's happening. We're perfectly aware of what's happening, but we're just coming back to the breath. We allow the thoughts to be there, just like space accommodates the clouds. And so this is how we meditate, and this is how generally we meditate, in where the the strength of the ordinary narratives that really consolidate this strong sense of I, me, and the object, the drama around me and what's happening, that is weakened because we're not regurgitating, perpetuating these habitual narratives. That's where we're actually breaking or cutting through a pattern. So there's something extraordinary taking place when we meditate. And it's not about us just going into some zone or anything. It's just that we are beginning to rebel or cut through the authority and the tyranny that thoughts have on us. And so this is something that applies when we meditate. And when we meditate, we could say we have the best conditions for doing that. But it also applies in everyday life, where as we become more familiar with meditation, the narratives begin to constitute less of a sort of authority. They have less authority or control over us. So it's not as if we are doing something where we're just escaping, but we are undermining the entire rogue government of the confused mind. So that's where meditation really is something that extracts us from a normal self-imposed bubble, which is very self-absorbed, and actually frees us and enables us to be more present, more participating in the world around us. And that's where we begin to have this empathy. And you could say the outcome of the sage's meditation is really compassion. The natural way this plays out in the case of a sage is not absorption into some particular mystical zone, but rather freeing this self-centering, that there's an awareness, a gentle awareness of the world around, an absence of aggression, and a wholehearted participation in the world. So we would say this quality of not being caught up, we refer to as wisdom, and this quality in which the self-centering is diminished is then where compassion emerges. So there's nothing not to like about the entire project of what the Buddha is proposing with meditation. And it has absolutely nothing to do with self-absorption. It has really just everything to do with providing a structure in which we could be onto this normal deceptive games of the mind. So this, in this context here, we do this first invoking the presence of the Buddha, and very much creating an atmosphere of the presence of the Buddha initially as, you could say, then a stepping stone into then where we rely on the Buddha within. So acknowledging the greatness of the Buddha, which of course in our culture is not that familiar, but this was composed in Tibet, where the qualities of the Buddha is generally quite known, and there's a lot of inspiration around the Buddha. But I think it's also happening here in general. Generally, the Buddha does have a bit of street cred, and there's a general sense of respect for the Buddha. So invoking the Buddha, even if it is very much in the language of bhakti, very much devotional language, I think most of us can probably handle it. This then sets the scene for the, you could say, dissolving of the reference of the Buddha as external, and then settling into meditation like we do it here. So we do 15 minutes of sitting meditation, generally coming back to the breath. Then there's 5 minutes of walking meditation where we focus on the footstep, just being aware, feeling the foot, heel, down step, up step, as we're doing the walking. And this way, as we're meditating, we continually have something we come back to. We're not drifting. And that drifting doesn't mean that we're going into an absorbed state, but it's actually something that cuts through the ordinary flow of our various storylines and ways that we constitute self and other. So that's very brief about the practice of meditation. We'll take a 2-minute break and then we'll begin. Thank you. Okay, just a little comment. A plea from booksellers, or on behalf of booksellers. Jeff Bezos makes 50% on every sale on Amazon, apparently. So please support the little booksellers and order it through. Here in Australia, we have Windhorse Books down in Newtown. They can get it, the book, and support your local bookseller. Yes. Windhorse is online, yeah, you can find it. And I think in Newtown it's called Bodhi Bookstore or something. Yeah. Huh?
They were in Glee.
They were in Glee, but they moved down to what's it called, King Street. Okay, all right. Oh, good. Okay. So, Windhorse. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the sacred happiness devoid of suffering. And may they dwell in boundless equanimity that is free from attachment and aversion. As the union of unborn emptiness and the ceaseless appearances of interdependence, magically there appears before me in the sky, amidst vast clouds of offerings, on a jewel-lined throne and lotus sun and moon disk seats, the incomparable teacher, Lion of the Chakras. His body the color of gold, adorned with major and minor marks. Clad in the 3 Dharma robes, he sits in Vajra posture. His right hand gracefully poised in the earth-touching mudra, and his left hand in the gesture of meditation, holding an alms bowl full of nectar. Like a mountain of gold, magnificent he shines in splendor, spreading beams of wisdom light across the whole expanse of space. The 8 close sons, 16 elders, and the like, a vast like retinue of noble beings encircles him all around. Simply think of him and he grants the glory of the highest bliss, liberation from samsara and nirvana, the 2 extremes. He is the great being, perfect embodiment of every source of refuge. With your great compassion, you embraced this turbulent and degenerate world and made 500 mighty aspirations. You are as exalted as the white lotus. Whoever hears your name shall never return to samsara. Most compassionate teacher, to you I pay homage. All my own and others' virtues of body, speech, and mind, together with all our possessions, visualized like Samantabhadra's offering clouds, I offer to you. All the harmful actions and transgressions I have committed throughout beginningless time, each and every one I now confess with intense and heartfelt regret. In all virtuous actions of the noble ones and ordinary beings, accumulated throughout the past, present, and future, I rejoice. Turn the wheel of the profound and vast Dharma teachings ceaselessly and in every direction, I pray. Your wisdom body is like space and remains changeless throughout past, present, and future. Yet in the perception of those to be guided, you go through the display of birth and death. Even so, let your form body continue always to appear. Through all the virtues I have accumulated in the past, am accumulating now, and will accumulate in the future, for the sake of benefiting all beings who are as infinite as space. May you, the sovereign of Dharma, be forever pleased, and may all attain the state of the victorious one, the Lord of Dharma. Living beings like us drift in this degenerate age, have no guidance nor protection. Because of your kindness, caring for us with surpassing compassion, every manifestation in this world now of the three jewels is your enlightened activity. You are then our only refuge, incomparable, supreme. So from our hearts we pray with total confidence and faith. Do not neglect the great promises you made in times gone by, but hold us until we attain enlightenment with your compassion. Supreme Teacher Bhagawan, Tathagata Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher Bhagawan, Tathagata Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher Bhagawan, Tathagata Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Te yata o muni muni maha munaya soha. 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 From the Buddha's body there emanates a great radiance, a multicolored rays of wisdom light, dispelling all our own and others' obscurations and causing all the genuine qualities of the Mahayana path to rise within us, so that we attain the level of perfection from which we will never return again to samsara. The miraculous display of the unsurpassable wisdom appears as the intentions, deeds, prayers, knowledge, love, and ability of all the Sugatas and their children. May all beings become exactly like them. I prostrate to all the Buddhas and to the Bodhisattvas endowed with the divine eye of the sages and to the Shravakas as well. I prostrate to Bodhicitta, which counteracts birth in all lower realms, perfectly shows the path to the higher realms, and leads to no aging nor death. Whatever negative actions I have done under the influence of an afflicted mind, in the presence of the Buddhas, I fully acknowledge them all. By the accumulation of any merit I have created through the three kinds of activities, may my seed of omniscience grow, and may I attain awakening that never ends. Whatever offerings to the Buddhas that can be found in realms of the 10 directions are known to the Buddhas who rejoice in them. I rejoice in all these offerings. I fully acknowledge all negative actions and rejoice in all merit. I prostrate to all the Buddhas. May I attain supreme primordial wisdom. I earnestly request the Bodhisattvas who reside on the 10 levels in all the direction of the worlds in the 10 directions to awaken into supreme enlightenment. Once you have awakened into genuine enlightenment, tame the Maras and their hordes. Turn the wheel of Dharma so that all living beings may be healed. With the sound of the great Dharma drum, may you free all sentient beings who are suffering. Throughout inconceivable millions of kalpas, may you remain and teach the Dharma. Mired in the swamp of desire, entangled in the strands of cyclic existence, I am fettered by all that binds. I supplicate those, supreme among humans, to look upon me. The Buddhas do not blame sentient beings who are flawed. With a loving heart for all sentient beings, may the Buddhas free them from the ocean of cyclic existence. Any perfect Buddhas who are present, those who have passed away, and those yet to come, may I train following in their way and engage in enlightened conduct. Having perfected the 6 paramitas, may I liberate the 6 families of sentient beings, Having actualized the 6 extraordinary faculties, may I reach unexcelled enlightenment. Future phenomena are not born, and those past will not occur. Present phenomena have no inherent nature. There is no actual location. There is no perception. There are no outer things. May I realize the Dhamma Dhatu of emptiness. According to the Buddhas, the great sages, there are no truly existent sentient beings nor life force. There is no truly existent individual and no nurturing of self. May I realize the Dhammatā, where the self is not present. An entity such as grasping onto a self in mind is not present within any of the paramitas. To benefit all sentient beings, may I give with generosity, free of avarice. Since things do not exist as entities, may my wealth appear spontaneously. Since all things totally disintegrate, may I perfect the paramita of generosity. Endowed with a flawless ethics that is guided by rules, and an ethics that is completely pure, with an ethics free of an arrogant mind, may I perfect the paramita of ethics. Just as the elements of earth, water, fire, and wind, bodhisattvas do not remain caught by mental constructs. By attaining patience, anger never arises. May I perfect the paramita of patience. Through the power of previous perseverance, having become stable, enthusiastic, and free of laziness, and through a strong body and mind, may I perfect the paramita of perseverance. Through the samadhi where all is illusion-like, through the samadhi of the hero's stride, and through the samadhi that is like a vajra, may I perfect the paramita of meditative concentration. Through actualizing the 3 gates of full liberation, the equal nature of the 3 times, and the 3 types of knowing as well, may I perfect the paramita of prajna. Through persevering in a bodhisattva's practice, may I attain the kaya praised by all the Buddhas, the luminous kaya and the kaya blazing with majesty. Thus may my intention be fulfilled. May I be like the famed Maitreya, who engaged in such a practice, perfected the paramitas, and perfectly abides at the zenith of the 10th level. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be free. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it does not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. May the Buddha appear in this world. May the light of the teaching shine like the sun. May the holders of the teaching live in harmony, and thus may all be auspicious for the teaching to endure. Pray for the good health of the teachers. We pray for their precious lives to be long. We pray for their activities to spread and increase. May we be blessed never to part from the teachers. Akashasya stiti avat yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuyahat jagadukani nata. Akashasya stiti avat yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuya jagadukani nignata. Tavan mama stiti bhuya jagadukani nignata. Tavan mama siti bhuyat jagadukani nignata. As long as space remains, as long as the world remains, may I too remain to alleviate the sufferings of the world. Thank you very much. Oh, by the way, announcement. Next weekend, it'll be online, but I'll do a program that's called Lojong. And it's something that's known all across, you could say, the universe of Mahayana Buddhism, which is essentially training the mind and thinking differently. It's training the mind and thinking from a wider perspective, just like we were talking about earlier. But where meditation very much is non-conceptual, this is conceptual. It actually, you could say, makes reasoned arguments for why there's a lot of validity in compassion, the greatness of mind. So it's a course that's, you can find it on the website. It's announced. It's called Lojong Cultivating Greatness of Mind. That's happening next. I'm going to do it's all going to be online. We're initially going to do it face to face, but it's just not possible due to the present regulations. Or it would be complicated. We'd have to all be wearing masks, including myself. So, but anyway, so it's online, and Friday night, 6:30 to 8, public talk, and then the weekend, Saturday, Sunday, from 10 to 4. So that has been
This coming weekend? Or the
this.
weekend after?
It's the coming weekend, 19 to 21. Yeah. Okay, so that's happening.